Good day, I am Mark Nicole Hernandez, and as we dive into this discussion, let's start with a little pop quiz moment that stirred up some waves on TV before.
Ay ang tatlong Catholic priests na sina Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, Jacinto Zamora na hinatulan ng kamatayan noong panahon ng Kastila ay kilala sa tawag na blank.
Pwede po pakiulat ng mga names?
Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, Jacinto Zamora.
Marjo! Yung nakalimutan ko mga pagketo. Ay, lang po. Mahina na po talaga ako sa...
I am so sorry, guys. And to steal. Yeah.
Majo, ha? Or
Joha.
Majo, ha?
Joha ako. Majoha, sure ka na ba?
Opo.
Majoha is wrong. Actually, it's GomBurZa.
Now, that was a funny mix-up, but beyond the laughter, it reminded us how crucial it is to get our history right. What they meant was GomBurZa, not just any acronym, but a name that echoes one of the most pivotal moments in our history. Presenting the Cavite Mutiny and the rebellion case against GomBurZa. In 1872, a brief but significant mutiny unfolded in the Philippines, marking a pivotal point in the country's struggle under Spanish rule. What was originally a protest by Filipino soldiers and workers turned into a symbol of deeper resistance. Dr. Trinidad H. Pardo de Tavera, a Filipino scholar and revolutionary, offered his perspectives on the historic event of the Cavite Mutiny. Trinidad H. Pardo de Tavera was more than just a historian. As a propagandist and advocate for reform, his interpretation of the Cavite Mutiny goes beyond the official Spanish account. For him, it was not a rebellion for independence, but a response to the oppressive policies of Governor General Rafael de Izquierdo. When General Izquierdo took over as Governor General in 1871, he reversed the progressive policies of his predecessors. He ruled with an iron fist, proclaiming that he would govern with a crucifix in one hand and a sword in the other. One of his first acts was to abolish the exemption from tribute and forced labor that Filipino workers and soldiers in Cavite had long enjoyed. The loss of these privileges stoked anger and unrest among the local population. On the night of January 20, 1872, the dissatisfaction reached a boiling point. Led by Sergeant Lamadrid, a group of Marines and artillerymen rose up at Fort San Felipe in Cavite. They attacked and killed their Spanish officers, hoping to ignite a larger rebellion. But the uprising was short-lived. Spanish forces from Manila quickly arrived, crushing the mutiny. The rebellion was over almost as soon as it began. The Spanish government, aided by the powerful friars, exaggerated the mutiny, framing it as a part of a larger plot for Philippine independence. This narrative allowed them to crack down on any opposition. The most well-known victims were the three priests, Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora, who were executed on false charges. Many prominent Filipinos, including intellectuals and reformists, were exiled or imprisoned, cementing a climate of fear. Pardo de Tavera argued that the Cavite Mutiny was not a grand revolutionary scheme but an isolated protest against unjust policies. Yet, the brutal repression that followed planted the seeds of a much larger resistance. While the mutiny failed, it awakened a national consciousness. The fear and admiration for those who stood up to the colonial government fueled future movements. From that time on, Filipinos began to quietly resist Spanish rule, and the idea of independence slowly took root. The Cavite Mutiny of 1872 may have been a short-lived rebellion, but in its wake, it set the stage for a larger movement. The tragic sacrifices of the men and women who suffered under Spanish rule paved the way for the fight for Philippine independence, a struggle that would ultimately succeed decades later. This is the story of the Cavite Mutiny, an uprising that, though crushed, sparkled the flame of a revolution. Next, one of the most controversial narratives came from Spanish historian Jose Montero y Vidal, who introduces the Spanish version of the Cavite Mutiny of 1872. Montero y Vidal's account, published in his book Historia General de Filipinas in 1895, portrayed the mutiny not as a minor revolt but as a grand conspiracy to overthrow Spanish sovereignty in the Philippines. His version implicated a group of Filipino soldiers and laborers frustrated by the abolition of their tax exemptions and forced labor privileges as the key factor. But Montero went further. He claimed that external influences including the Spanish Revolution and the spread of republican ideas spurred Filipino intellectuals to seek independence. According to him, sections of the native clergy, out of animosity towards the friars, secretly supported the rebellion. In his narrative, Montero implicated prominent Filipino figures including the priests Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora, who were later executed for their alleged role in the uprising. But many believe that this version was far away from truth. Filipino scholar Dr. Trinidad H. Pardo de Tavera heavily criticized Montero's account, calling it biased and misleading. According to him, the mutiny was a small-scale protest distorted by Spanish authorities to justify brutal crackdowns on nationalist leaders. Though Montero y Vidal's version was widely accepted in Spain, Filipino historians view it as a tragic misinterpretation, a tool used to suppress the growing nationalist sentiment in the island. Today, the truth of the Cavite Mutiny continues to echo, reminding us that history is often written by those in power.